Hi, I'm Nico. I'm here to respond to the claim by Marcos that private citizens owning guns is an overall good thing. Now, overall good thing seems more like a value argument, but I think what he's trying to say is that private citizens owning guns will contribute to the safety and welfare of people. So the secondary claims. The first claim is that police officers are not always on time. His second claim was that more guns equal less crime. And his third claim was that current gun laws only restrict good people from owning guns. And so his first claim, that police officers are not always on time. It seems like common sense that of course a police officer can't suddenly appear when someone calls 911. However, this being a supporting claim to the argument makes an assumption that's important to point out. The assumption is that having access to guns for private citizens will allow private citizens to do the job that cops would normally be able to do. This is not necessarily a valid assumption. It has to be proven with support, and there was not really any for this particular point. And so it doesn't directly contribute to the main proposition. The second point is that more guns equal less crime. The two pieces of evidence that were cited here are that Washington, D.C. has strict gun laws, but a higher crime rate than Indianapolis, which has looser gun laws. In 2012, according to the Washington, D.C. and Indianapolis governmental websites, the number of murders in Indianapolis is higher than the number of murders in Washington, D.C., 97 in Indianapolis versus 88 in D.C. Plus, the number of assaults and number of rapes in Indianapolis are both greater than the number of those crimes in Washington, D.C. 436 versus 236 for rape, and 5,967 versus 3,339 for assaults. Now, this is also taking into account that that Indianapolis has a bigger population than DC. However, the ratios of these numbers, if you do the math, does come out to Indianapolis still having a higher, about the same, if not higher rates than these. And so, relying simply on these crime rates to make inferences about the level of crime as a whole is unreliable. Even if the gun laws are, as stated, there are only 2 US cities listed, one of which is the capital city. And there are many other causes that affect crime rate. And the crime rate's not the only way to measure the amount of crime. The third point was that current gun laws only restrict good people from owning guns. According to the National Gun Victims Action Council, a vast majority of the 12,000 annual gun murders are done by people who have illegally obtained guns. That's the proof that he used in his argument. And it's not explicitly stated how private citizens owning guns legally will stop gun murders. We are not given much reason to believe that these people can stop these murders, besides the sentiment that that he used at the beginning of the speech, that most people would rather fight someone who is weaker than them than someone with an unequal level. Also, according to a study by Matthew Miller and 2 of his peers, there are higher gun-related homicide rates in regions with higher rates of firearm ownership. Non-gun-related homicide rates were also elevated in regions where there were more guns, but to a lesser extent. And so, to summarize, that police officers are not always on time implies that people can do the job that police officers have if they have guns, and that's not necessarily true. Second point, that more guns equal less crime. The 2 cities that were examined have pretty similar crime rates, and simply relying on those crime rates to determine the amount of crime is unreliable. And also, and the third point, current gun laws only restrict good people from owning guns. Again, it's not said how owning guns will stop gun murders, and some studies have even shown that there are higher amounts of violent crimes in areas with more guns. And that's it. Should I say this?
It's okay. Structurally, you did a good job. I like the fact that you tried to interpret what the proposition ultimately means so that it'll be clearer for your responses and for us to follow along. On the first point, you have a good explanation of the assumption that's going on there. You challenge the absence of any proof for that particular assumption. That comes up again in the third point, and I think that you waited until that third point to present any evidence to suggest that there is no relationship or ability to actually defend yourself simply because of the gun availability. That evidence was a little bit more general. It's just the statistical comparison that you have. On the second point, I thought that you basically challenged the evidence that the advocate is presenting on this point by looking at the two-city comparison, suggesting that they aren't substantially different and that you can't reach a valid conclusion from that. You explained that. I thought that was pretty well done. When you also made an argument that said that there are other underlying causes for crime to occur and explanations about variations, and I think that that's a good argument. I think you could have used some evidence to support that particular point. On the third point, let's see. Oh, you cited the advocate's evidence on that issue concerning the guns that are being used in crime. The majority of them were obtained illegally. I think there's a little bit of confusion on this issue at first, because I think what the advocate in essence is saying here is that criminals are unlikely to follow the guidelines of the laws that are being put into effect. And your argument seems to be the self-defense issue that comes up. And so I'm not exactly sure that the self-defense issue addresses that particular point. You also now provide the evidence on the self-defense issue based on the number of guns that are available, suggesting that there is likely a correlation between higher gun availability and higher crime rates. And I thought that was a good piece of evidence on that point. It would be helpful to contrast it a little bit to the evidence that the advocate had on that point. I don't remember that they had any. You've got a very solid summary, and except for the exit line, I thought that was pretty good. The exit line, of course, we've had it 3 or 4 times tonight, and I haven't yelled at anybody about it yet, but I should. Yeah, that's all, folks. So Porky Pig